Not so long ago, in a world full of strife, a man born a wolf, living a dual life. With magic in his veins, he walked the school hall, learning the arts, answering the call. But fear was a cloak he had to wear tight, hiding his truth, keeping darkness from light. Those who were scared turned away in despair, yet he bore the burden, he chose to take care. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare. With tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. In the shadows he lingered, where darkness would creep, protecting those kindly, never losing sleep. A guardian of secrets, a keeper of lore, he wandered through echoes, hearts wanting much more. No longer the wolf, but a sage with a pen, turning back the pages, reliving back then. His stories weave magic in the minds of the young, of battles and triumphs where songs will be sung. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare. With tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. Listen closely, hear the whispers in the breeze, of knights and of dragons beneath the ancient trees. The wolf in his wisdom has so much to share, from magic to courage, loving hearts laid bare. So gather round children, let the stories unfold, of a man who had magic, but chose to be bold. Through tales of old, his spirit survives, a wolf in disguise, in every heart he thrives. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare. With tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. So remember this lesson as you look to the skies, even hidden beneath, we see with our hearts, not our eyes. For every wolf's journey, there's magic in the tales of kindness and courage, where love prevails. Not so long ago, in a world full of strife.
Okay, I almost have the timing on that right. Tinkering with settings for a moment. It makes me wonder if I can actually remove the microphone from my opening screens. That way I don't have to worry about it being on when I'm on. No, weird stuff I'm thinking of. But anyway, congrats on getting first guilty. Crystalline allotrope of carbon. Makes me think, I actually got a fullerene stone when I was in Colorado, which is also just carbon. But what's really funny is I got it as a sphere. And if you don't know what fullerene is, it is a carbon molecule with, I think, 60 atoms in combination that was named after Buckminster Fuller. And also has a nickname of a buckyball. So I have a ball of buckyball, because I am just that strange. Let's think, I think I have... No, I've got most forms of carbon now. So I do have a diamond, because it was an engagement ring that luckily I got back. I have a jet, which is slightly looser gemstone that's also a carbon. And now I have fullerene. Of course, graphite. Oh, I can't write without pencils occasionally, so I have graphite too. But anyway, how's your week been, Guilty? Are you just on your way to work and checking in, or... Oh, I have actually added stuff for when I do Cyberpunk. Since I was getting the Streamloots announcements up anyway, and I can't do anything for that. You are getting ready for work? Okay. But since I don't have crowd control for Cyberpunk, I went ahead and made losing my mind, Streamloots redeems for that, which will pretty much be you telling me how to play the game, which will be interesting. I don't really expect anyone to do it because unfortunately it does require money. I don't know if I'm able to give out some. I think I should be able to. I'll have to look into this more. But it's something I'd meant to do for a long time. And I've been on Streamloots for now since I got affiliate. But I haven't really done anything with it. I think I just started out doing jump scares and videos and stuff on that. Well, the jump scares and videos are still part of it, and they will show up in my alerts window up there. Well, you can't really see it because it's just got the ghost thing there right now. I have not checked to see if my sound alerts are working yet, because I'm OBS updated, so I haven't done much to test it yet. So let's see. Well, okay, well, that works. And let's see. Sound alerts. Okay, sound alerts works. I've never really done anything with the TTS. Kind of debating getting rid of it. Because, well, it is technically AI generated as far as the voices go, because, well, yeah, so, and I mean, no one redeems it anyway, so just be one more open spot. And even then, the company that's the TTS Monster has joined with sound alerts anyway, so I don't need to have multiple accounts for it. I haven't figured that out yet. Well, yeah, but choosing an actor's voice, I don't exactly want to contribute my own voice to it. I was originally going to try to get the TTS set up with the Raven pet that I also don't use, because, you know, a Raven doing various voices would make complete sense. I'm not sure if I would have to get another Twitch account for that one to set it up, or I don't know. And Kel does most of the bot speak anyway. Well, speaks for most of the bots. But she does sound alert, she does Phosabot, she does stream elements. No, she doesn't do sound alerts. And congrats on a 3-stream streak. I don't think that's something many people have achieved. Except Kel, but Kel is technically my bot. I'm also half tempted to go ahead and bump Panda from a mod, because I don't think Panda's even been to one of my streams. Of course, it was just making them a mod for the hell of it, but I don't know. I mean, the bots do most of the work anyway. And I have to go back and explain why bans happen. That's just because Cerebots really good at catching things to ban. True. Of course, I'd be tempted to offer my services for other mods positions since I have no life. And I'm modding another channel right now while I'm streaming. And he doesn't even raid me. But I don't know. It's strange because last month, I'll just think about weird things about streaming. So last month I went from 459 followers and ended at 456. And now I've gained 2 more back. So I've got a month and a half to try to reach my goal for 500. But what could just having followers do if no one actually comes to the streams? I need to just get rid of that goal. It's kind of pointless. And it may or may not just be the person talking, so. Get rid of the subscription goal anyway. I did manage to have people gift subs to get me up to 28 sub points, and I gifted 2 more subs just so I could get the sub points. So I could add 2 more emotes. Let's see, it's 9:10. I guess I should get over to the reading stream, which would be this one. Of course, I also kind of feel bad I haven't used the model that I won. That took over a year for me to get. I mean, this one was given and modeled and done. Well, I don't know how that'd feel if I gave you one of mine. Because I'm not really sure if I would ever use the other model. Because it doesn't really go with my style. Where is it? This one? Yeah. I'm not sure when I'd ever use this one. Because it really just isn't my style. I mean, it's not a bad model, it's just I'm really more used to Fan Artsy's version. Is that art is closer to what I've used for 7 years now. And I don't know why people keep putting a turtleneck on me. But I prefer my wizard, so. I mean, if you wanted to get a model closer to mine anyway, I would check with Fanartsy. Or, I can't remember what name they're going by now. But they did this based off of the artwork that they had already done for me. And they did my first model too. But they like to do more fantasy, and it gets the size of my chair again. I think that's how I had it. Somewhere in here. Okay. I guess I should get into the story. But we are, by chapter count, halfway through the book. Which means all in all this will be a 16 or 17 page series. Well, part series. And I did reorganize the YouTube channel. So I've got the streams. So there's literature streams, and it's going to be a Wolf Reads. And then on the actual one, the stories themselves, I just have a title, I think. I don't know. I really kind of fried my brain this week, and when I was trying to do all this stuff. Yesterday, I spent the entire day playing. Well, Matsu, you could get first. I mean, I just need to start streaming half an hour earlier so you can actually raid me. I wonder why my shoutouts aren't working. Kel, you're slacking off on the job. Seriously? What is wrong with you? Why did you shout guilty out for Matsu? Okay, well. Programming is just screwy. So I'll do a regular one. Maybe. Okay. Guilty, if you haven't watched Matsu, he's another storyteller. He does play games. Usually streams, I think, 2 or 3 times a week. But, yeah. A little bit earlier in the evening than I am. So, feel free to give Matsu a follow. I'm really gonna have to check to see what's going on with Fosabot. This Matsu should have his own keyword recognition. Yeah, it's still there. Huh. Weird. I don't know why I did the same shout-out command for both of you. Okay, I was advertising the bookstore again. I wonder how much it would be to get art to actually do March, but I don't care. But anyway, let's get into the book. And we are on Chapter 17. The day following was appointed for the departure of the two families of the Duke and Sir Ambrose for the country, and the whole preceding evening was passed by the two old men in arranging their plans and forming new schemes to ensure success. Elvira took no part in this conversation, though certainly the person most interested. She was thoughtful and distrait. She was too restless to remain in one place. She walked to the window, she returned, and she sat down again. She attempted to work, to read, to draw. All was in vain. All seemed tasteless and insipid. Again she went to the window, and opening the folding doors, stepped out upon the balcony. It was a delightful night, and the air felt soft and warm. Vines, laden with their luscious fruits, twined the pillar to pillar of the balcony, forming a kind of verdant network, whilst the moon shone bright on the lovely scene beyond. Below, a smooth green lawn stretched forth like a velvet carpet, bounded on each side by Chinese rose trees, the delicate tints of which looked still more transparently beautiful in the lovely night. Behind these, rose trees of a loftier height and deeper shade, whilst the extremity of the lawn wound to the river. The clear moonbeams trembled on the gently rippling stream, and gave transparent brightness to the graceful foliage of a weeping willow, which hung over the water and quivered in every passing breeze. Elvira gazed upon the fair scene before her, and sighed heavily as she gazed. A gentle sigh softly echoed hers, and she started to find that Henry Seymour was standing before her. "How beautiful is nature," he said, "when undefiled by the follies and sins of man. Here one might forget the world, and all its busy turmoil of deceit. When one gazes thus upon the sublime and lovely face of nature, how poor do all the arts, the ambition, and the pitiful contrivances of man appear! The soul seems elevated to its proper sphere, and to long to throw off the frail covering of clay, which yet chains it down to the groveling passions of earth, and to soar triumphant in its native skies." His fine eyes were turned to heaven as he spoke, and Elvira gazed upon them, and his notable countenance beaming with enthusiasm till she quite forgot to reply. "Do you not agree with me, Elvira?" said he, in a tone of the softest melody, fixing his eyes upon hers with a look that sank deep into her heart. Again she sighed deeply, but she could not speak. "Oh, Elvira," continued he, taking her hand, "will you forget me? Will not the remembrance of this night form a tie between us, when we shall be far apart? When we shall be far, far apart?" "Apart?" cried Elvira, almost with a shriek of surprise. The youth sighed, and gazing earnestly upon her blushing face, whispered tenderly, and pressed her hand to his heart. "Oh, that I could flatter myself sorrow mingled with that sigh!" "What is this?" said the old Duke, bustling into the window. "The doctor tells me you're going to leave us. Surely you might contrive to stay until the election." "I'm very sorry, sir," said the youth, "but the circumstance that calls me away—" Aye, the doctor told me, a near relation dangerously ill. That can't be die in peace till he's seen you. Well, my boy, such things must be. If he's doomed to die, I only wish him an easy death, and you will be a good legacy." "I cannot tell you how sorry I am to part with you," said Sir Ambrose, who now advanced, "nor how sincerely I wish you good fortune." Thank you, sir," said the youth. "Alas, I now feel how poor words are to express my gratitude for all your kindness, but—" "I'm sorry to hasten you, Mrs. Seymour," said Dr. Coleman, who now approached, "but Time wears space. True, true, said Henry. I had but forgotten. One more farewell. God bless you all. And he hurried away, as though fearful of his own resolution if he stayed another second. For the rest of the evening, Elvira For the rest of the evening, Elvira was silent and abstracted. The suddenness of the blow seemed to have stunned her, and she felt like one wandering in a dream. Was he really gone? Should she never see him more? Were questions she scarcely dared to ask even herself. He was nothing to me, a mere commonplace acquaintance, she repeated incessantly, and yet she felt wearisome void, a sickening disgust of impatience at every one around her, which she had never experienced before. What can be the matter with me? She said peevishly. I shall never see him again, and it is the excess of weakness to feel an interest in the fate of one who is evidently so indifferent about me, and yet he seemed affected when he said that we were about to part. Was he really so? But what of the consequence to me, and whether he is here or not? I shall never see him more. And Elvira sighed involuntarily at the thought. I am devoted to other prospects. In short, I will think of him no more. And in pursuance of this magnanimous resolution, she thought of nothing else all night. The following day, Elvira and her friends went to the country, but as Cheops had predicted, the Duke and Sir Ambrose provided quite unequal to the task they had undertaken, and then only lost their popularity by the attempt. The men were disgusted to see the personages hitherto considered so respectable descend to meanness, and the shallowness of the artifices by which they intended to impose upon them excited their contempt. In the meantime, Lord Edmund was not more successful in London than his friends in the country. He had marched a party of chosen troops with a convenient distance of the metropolis. In consequence of his high ill-measure, the members of the council, to show that they were not influenced by the fear of military authority, and to vindicate their independence, invariably opposed every measure that he suggested. As the law, however, forbade any decisive promises till the actual day of election, there was still hope, though the friends of Elvira struggled on, rather from wish not too hastily to abandon her cause, than from any rational, well-founded prospect of success. In the midst of these anxieties, Elvira's health indeed seemed rapidly declining. A weight that nothing could alleviate hung upon her spirits. She made no effort to secure voters, but pale, silent, and melancholy she glided about, the ghost of her former self. Still, however, she was lovely, and increased delicacy of her complexion and shadowless lightness of her form harmonized well with the general style of her beauty, whilst her fine eyes, shaded by their long silken lashes, only shone more brilliantly from the glowing hectic of the cheek below. The time fixed for the important ceremony now rapidly approached. The election of the deputies was concluded, and the families of the Duke and Sir Ambrose prepared to return to town. The night, however, before they departed, the Duke gave a grand fête champêtre to the neighboring gentry, and as a considerable number of the deputies were expected, he particularly enjoined Elvira to exert herself to the utmost to win their suffrages. Never perhaps had Elvira looked more beautiful than she did that night. As pale, trembling, and timid, she received her numerous guests, and never, perhaps, was effect more magical than that which her appearance produced. Her very diffidence and modesty attracted, and the reserve with which she shunned, rather than sought the attention of the crowd, completed the enchantment. It is her fear of seeming to wish to interest us, whispered one deputy to another, that makes her treat us so coldly. Yes, replied another, and I like her better for it. If she were to attempt to make herself agreeable, I should hate her, and the Duke and Sir Ambrose have sickened us of that. The fête was given in the gardens of the Duke, which were beautiful and extensive, and now brilliantly illuminated by lights suspended by the trees. There was something, however, not quite congenial to Elvira's taste, and thus marrying the gorgeous splendor of art to the simplicity of nature, and she sighed heavily as she watched the flaring lamps scorching the pale verdure of the trees. "Now this is as it should be," said the old Duke, as he led his daughter to the pavilion appointed for her to receive her guests. "Elvira now looks like herself, does she not, Dr. Coleman?" The doctor shook his head. "I fear," began he. "Oh, we will have no fears tonight," said the Duke gaily. "Remember, Elvira, everything now depends upon you. Play the part of the smiling condescending hostess, and win the hearts of the deputies, and you will make that your old father leap for joy. We shall have a gay party, shan't we, Doctor?" continued he, eyeing the groups as they advanced. "I wish your friend Henry Seymour were here amongst us." Elvira started, and the deep blushes suffused her cheeks at the mention of his name. The doctor eyed her attentively, though he replied as though he had not noticed her agitation. "It was urgent business, you know, that obliged him to leave England." "He is a charming youth," said the Duke, "so gay and yet so fearless. I think, however, I observed that his spirit seemed much depressed the last time I saw him." "Oh, you know, he said it was death. I mean the illness of a relation that compelled him to go." "Young men don't generally feel so much for the illness, or even death of the old ones," returned the Duke. "Now, if I were to judge, Doctor, I should think it was far more likely that it was some love affair. But we can't stay talking about it now. I must go and attend to my guests, and you do mind, Elvira, and make yourself agreeable." Poor Elvira, however, was perhaps never less fitted to obey her father's injunctions than at this moment, for the conversation she had just heard had quite deranged her nerves. Her father's supposition inflicted a deep pang on her heart, and though she went to her duties to the station mechanically, her mind wandered to Henry Seymour. It was a lovely night, and the general effect of the scene, as groups of elegantly dressed people flitted to and fro through the lighted groves, was striking to the extreme. The flowering exotics decorated the pavilion of Elvira, and the balmy air that fanned their blossoms seemed loaded with sweets, whilst the richly illuminated castle, rearing its lofty towers in awful grandeur in the distance, had the appearance of a fairy palace. Elvira listed gracefully on the magic scene, till she felt almost fainted from the fatigue her situation as hostess impended on her, and upon with a languid and almost despairing eye upon the crowds that came still pouring into the gardens. The throng, however, now opened, and a tall, dignified figure found its way through the mass. It was Lord Edmund. He approached rapidly and threw himself at Elvira's feet. "My adored Elvira!" exclaimed he. "You're here, my lord!" cried the princess, whose eyes, enfeebled by exhaustion, had not permitted her to recognize him till he was immediately before her. "I did not expect to see you here tonight." "Does my presence pain you?" said Lord Edmund, looking at her attentively. "They told me you were ill, and I do indeed find you changed." "I am better now," returned Elvira. "Do not deceive yourself," cried he, in the most intense anxiety. "You are ill. You are not equal to this fatigue. Retire from the scene. It will destroy you." "I dare not," replied Elvira, still more feebly. "Without permission of my father, though, I own, I do feel exhausted." Lord Edmund waited for no more, but darted to find the Duke, and obtain his wished for sanction. The next instant the place was supplied by Prince Ferdinand, who had been invited into the country a few days before by the Duke, and who, with the inconsistency in nature to his disposition, had now become as deeply smitten with Elvira as he had been with Rosabella. Elvira, however, saw him not, and looking gratefully after Lord Edmund, sighed profoundly as she lost sight of him among the crowd. "Happy Edmund," said the prince, "what I could not give to create a feeling in that lovely bosom like that of thy absence." Elvira blushed and earnest gaze by the youthful German, as she replied, without exactly knowing what she'd said. "Do you suppose, then, that the absence of Lord Edmund gave me pain?" What other cause can I divine for your melancholy? Said Ferdinand. Adored by every heart, admired by every eye, and blessed at once with rank beauty and affliction, what can Elvira wish? What can cloud her brow to sorrow, to heave her lovely bosom with a sigh, unless it is the loss of the favoured lover whom ambition bids her sacrifice? And you think so poorly of me, returned Elvira indignantly, as to suppose, if I really loved Lord Edmund, that ambition would tempt me to sacrifice him. Can a heart like yours then really be dead to love? Said the prince, gazing upon her earnestly. Can nature have formed such exquisite beauty and forgotten to give a soul to pity the wretches it must take? Elvira blushed deeply as he spoke, for his ardent look embarrassed her, and her eyes, having been modestly withdrawn, again met those of Lord Edmund, who had returned without her perceiving him. 'Twas but a moment, however, as she gazed upon him, for she shrank aghast from the withering glance. Jealousy and hatred curled his lips and darkened upon his brow, whilst his features seemed so changed that Elvira could scarcely believe he was indeed the same as he had spoken so. I beg your pardon. I beg your highness's pardon, he laughed hotly. I would not have presumed to intrude if I had known you were engaged. I fancied that you wished to retire, and had obtained the duke's permission for you to doing so, but— Oh, thank you, Edmund, cried Elvira. Most gladly I will seek my chamber. Then, marking a slight smile upon Prince Ferdinand's face, she hesitated, for she recollected the interpretation he had put upon her melancholy and indifference. Lord Edmund's agony was beyond description. He saw her hesitation, he saw her look at Ferdinand, and fancying she sought his approval before she should retire, his jealous rage was unbounded, and darting at her a look of ungovernable passion, he sprang from the pavilion and was out of sight in an instant. Elvira could not bear his look, nor his unreasonable jealousy, and, exhausted by her previous fatigue, she fainted. The crowd soon gathered around her, and she was carried to her chamber in a state of insensibility. Mark me, said a figure muffled with a thick cloak, speaking in a deep, low voice, as he laid his hand upon the arm of Father Morris, who stood gazing after Elvira with a look of intense anxiety. She must not die, or if she does, I swear by the holy tomb of Osiris and Philae, Rosabella never shall be queen. From that hour, Elvira recovered, and the consumptive symptoms that had so strongly excited the alarm of her friends entirely disappeared. Lord Edmund was conversing earnestly with one of the deputies, and, notwithstanding his jealousy, advocating the cause of Elvira with vehemence, when he was informed that she had fainted. His first impulse was to fly to her assistance, and when he found that she had been removed to her chamber, his heart smote him for the cruel manner in which he had left her. She really was ill, thought he, and in her feeble state my harshness overpowered her. But never again shall my foolish jealousy disturb her peace. No, let her scorn me, hate me if she will. I will bear all the tortures she can inflict, rather than again hazard wounding a gentle bosom. Let her smile on whom she wills, even if it's the hated German. I will not repent. If she is happy, I will ask no more. Thus thought Edmund, and he knew not that he deceived himself until he saw Prince Ferdinand, who with the happy elasticity of youth was chatting gaily with one of the beauties of the court. Love him, thought he, as a scornful smile passed over his features. Love him, did I say? Oh, no, it is impossible. I could not endure to see her love that coxcomb. And shuddering with the torments of jealousy, he turned away. Cheops was near him, muffled in a thick cloak that enshrouded him from observation. The mummy marked the changes in Lord Edmund's countenance, and read well the feelings he betrayed. Yes, even he said, with one of his fearful laughs, will soon be mine, and never yet did man trust his own strength that did not fall. Hey, Siri Watts doing his job. Chapter 18. The day of the election now rapidly approached. The Duke, Sir Ambrose, and the rival candidates and the opposition lords were all in London. Deputies were also assembled, and though it was forbidden to declare publicly for whom they intended to vote till the decisive moment arrived, yet the popular feeling seemed so strongly in favor of Rosabella that there appeared scarcely a chance for her rival. Exulting in her expected triumph and confident of her success, Rosabella sate in the splendid boudoir allotted to her by Lord Gustavus's house, musing on her hoped-for grandeur. A large mirror was opposite her, and as Rosabella saw her own fine figure reflected in it, she sparkled in her eyes, and her mind wandered enraptured through the scenes of future glory. Thus completely absorbed in pleasing meditations, Rosabella was not aware that Cheops stood before her, till she heard his full, deep-toned voice repeating her name. "Rosabella," said he. "Rosabella, Queen of England, hail!" "Cheops!" exclaimed she. "Hail to the Queen of England," resumed he. "No longer need you stoop to solicit suffrages. Your fate is sealed." "Think you that I'm quite safe?" asked the princess, her eyes sparkling and her cheeks glowing. "Certainly, there can be no doubt." "Then I may bide defiance to these wretches, and need no longer submit to their caprices or their subservient to their numbers." "Not unless you like it." "Like it!" exclaimed Rosabella, with her eyes flashing fire. "Can you suppose I'd like to practice meanness?" "Policy indeed recommends a contrary course," continued the mummy, "as if you do not assert your own independence, they will encroach upon your condensation and treat you like a slave." Rosabella bit her lips, and her bosom swelled with indignation. The mummy took no notice of her agitation, but went on. "Let them not bind you by any promises. Prove yourself a free and independent sovereign, and trample upon them, and they will crouch at your feet, but crouch to them, and they will trample upon you." "You're right," said Rosabella proudly, "and my would-be masters soon shall find their error. They think weakness has made me submit to their arrogance, but they shall see their folly." The influence the mummy exercised over the minds of those he came in contact with was astonishing. In pursuance of his advice, Rosabella, from this moment, resumed her usual imperious manner, and received the compliments paid to her with the air rather of an empress long seated upon the throne than that of an aspiring candidate for regal honors, dependent only upon the favor of the people. The excessive confidence, however, displeased the deputies. "She hardly leaves us a choice," they said, "for she seems to command us to choose her, notwithstanding the strength of her party and the weakness of her rival. We don't think she should be quite the thing in her own hands, and the old queen ordered that the people should choose her successor, but this princess seems to have chosen herself. It is very kind of her to wish to save us a trouble, but with her good leave, we think we might be managed to go through it without her help." These murmurs, however, though deep, were not loud, the party of Rosabella being too firmly established for anyone to dare openly to oppose it. The opposition lords had all returned to town, and though they had not completely succeeded in their objective to the journey of the country, they had at least satisfied themselves, and by the activity they displayed, given themselves, as they imagined, the just title to the gratitude of their future queen. In the meantime, the friends of Elvira almost despaired. Few persons of note declared themselves her advocates, and though the favorable impression she had made upon the duties still faintly operated, the feeling was fast fading away. The invincible repugnance to appear as the leader of the party oppressed her, and she sank from the public gaze with a little short of horror. Lord Edmund, however, still remained her firm and almost her only friend. But though he exerted every nerve on her behalf, even he despaired of obtaining her election. Sometimes, indeed, he gazed upon her beauty. A selfish feeling crept over his soul, and he could scarcely repress an emotion of joy, as he thought the possibility that she might still be his, for the very qualities that impeded her success only endeared her more fondly to his heart. The next instant, however, the nobler feelings would reproach with selfish joy, and with a kind of penitential sorrow he would strive by fresh efforts to destroy the hopes, for the gratification of which his very soul pained. "I presume," said Lord Gustavus de Montfort to Rosabella, the day before that appointed for the election, "Your Highness does not intend to make Mayforth a minister as a general, for thinking as I think, and as I am confident everyone else must think, I feel assured he has no talents for the cabinet." "As Queen of England, my lord," returned Rosabella proudly, "I will not be dictated to, though I will do my best to choose such ministers as I may, in my judgment, be most likely to promote the welfare of my country." Lord Gustavus was thunderstruck, and he gazed after her as she retired, with mingled feelings of astonishment and indignation. "You are not Queen of England yet, however," he said to himself, "and it may be possible you may never be. What pride, what haughtiness! If I had been a slave, she could not have thrown more contempt. When I am Queen of England, said she, and I will not be dictated to. Queen of England, said she. Humph! Thinking as I think, and I'm sure that everyone else must think, it is possible." Oh, thank you for the raid. Oh, welcome in. Give me a moment. Nightmare difficulty of Cyberpunk. I haven't gotten Phantom Liberty yet. Of course, I'm still working on the first one. So, how's stream? So, getting along with the chooms? Ooh. Post-nuclear America. Yeah, that ties into Cyberpunk pretty well. Guys wrestling women in masks. Sounds interesting. So what book is that? Or what story, anyway? Ah, coming attraction. I may have to look into that. I was curious when I see stuff like that. Okay. That I could definitely see. Oh, it's a series. Dang. Oh. I would definitely have to look into that. Okay. Guilty, did you have to redeem second too? Okay. That's fine. Yes, you got first. Doofus. Let's say you got first, and Matsu came in and complained about not getting it because he wasn't first. Anyway, thinking about Cyberpunk, this book is um, technically steam. Yeah, it's technically steampunk, which is interesting because this book would actually take place after Cyberpunk. Everything that's going on in this book. I mean, the book was written in. Yeah, this book was written in 1828. And it was written to be 200 years in the future. 2 or 300. Well, it's 22nd Century Tale. It's in the book title. So the book is taking place in 2126. So this is 50 years after Cyberpunk 2027? Or 2077? So we would have had to have done a major step back from Cyberpunk to do this one. Admittedly, the houses in England are on rails. We've gone back to hot air balloons, basically. Oh. The professor and his apprentice in this one, who actually basically jump-started the mummy with a car battery. I'm never going to give that up. They used a galvanic battery and put it on a necklace on the chest plate of the mummy and resurrected him. They jump-started the mummy. Which, they used electricity to get the mummy going, but Frankenstein, in the actual book, was a chemical injection, so... But it's like they were using hot air balloons. They traveled from London to Memphis in Egypt to Cheops. Cheops is an actual mummy who... I was laughing about it. There was a news article about them moving his solar ship to a different location using a specific mechanical method. I'm going, well, it checks out with the book, because he jumped into a hot air balloon with absolutely no knowledge about it, thinking it was the goddess's chariot. And it accidentally took him to London. So, yeah, it's cyberpunk regression, because they're experimenting on electricity actually animating body parts. So yeah, this is really ancient cyberpunk. I mean, it was written in the Victorian period, so it makes sense. But I thought it was funny that, oh yeah, I'm reading this book from 1827 and 2025 about 2126. So it's all just really out there. But apparently the Queen of England is voted on, and it's pretty much a life position, but you have to be chaste because you don't want emotions reflecting over the guidance of the people. And the mummy is kind of manipulating things behind the scenes. But it's the mummy Cheops, who I guess the picture on the cover may actually be a picture of him. Or it's just any other desiccated corpse, because the mummy was supposed to be in good condition. Why a mummy was still well preserved after 300 years, I couldn't tell you. But yeah. Sci-fi from the 1800s. Definitely an interesting thing to read. But ads are coming up, so it was probably a good time to pause in the story anyway. And I've been playing Cyberpunk, and that's when I saw the article about the ship being moved, I just had to laugh about the fact I'm reading about that mummy. But anyway, if you have any after stream care to take care of, by all means, go for it. If you feel free to lurk, as I said, ads are going to be hitting here soon. And then I'll continue with the story after that. Sound good? Yeah, that's another post message. Yeah, it's always really weird when it happens. Huh, my sound alert for alert didn't work. Anyway, I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, everyone, welcome back. Well, a good time I had that break because I spent most of it coughing. Because the voice of Cheops tends to do that. Not nearly as bad as when I was doing Renfield. But still, Cheops has a very grating, hollow, no, cryptic voice. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start back at where Lord Gustavo starts talking to himself. Just because I like doing his voice. Lord Gustavus was thunderstruck, and he gazed after her as she retired, with mingled feelings of astonishment and indignation. "You are not Queen of England yet, however," he said to himself, "and it is possible you may never be. What pride, what haughtiness! If I had been a slave, she could not have shown more contempt. When I am Queen of England," she said, "and I will not be dictated to." "Queen of England," said she, "thinking as I think, and I am sure everyone else must think, it is possible that it is a contingency that may never arrive. I will not be dictated to. Well, certainly I must confess I never heard a more dignified will not in my entire life." It was the hour when Lord Gustavus was accustomed to hold a kind of levee with the partisans, and the princess had been in the habit of assembling, all under the guise of casual visitors, and he thus cognogated. Lord Mayworth and Dr. Hardman were announced. "My Lord Gustavus," cried the former, "you cannot imagine how impatient I feel to have tomorrow over. The uniform of the household troops is horrible. I have determined to change it in every instant I am appointed commander-in-chief." "If you should obtain that situation," replied Gustavus doubtfully. "What do you mean?" asked his friend in astonishment. "I thought that means we must be infallibly secure success." "They must ensure the election of Rosabella," replied Lord Gustavus. "And is that not what we all wish?" "Not quite," returned Lord Gustavus dryly. "I do not understand you," said Lord Maysworth. What do you mean?" demanded Dr. Hardman. "I mean," replied Lord Gustavus in his usual cold, precise manner, "that, thinking as I think, and as I'm sure everyone else must think, from the conversation that has just taken place between the princess and myself, I'm convinced that our possession of the places she has promised to us is by no means a necessary consequence of her ascension to the throne." "Oh!" cried his auditors, looking perfectly aghast. A further explanation confirmed their fears. "I could not have believed," exclaimed both. As the partisans of Rosabella continued to arrive, they were successively apprised and paralyzed by the appalling news. Divers were the sensations thus excited, and amongst all, notwithstanding their professed disinterestedness, there was not one whose sentiments remained unchanged by the intelligence. In the meantime, Rosabella, in the solitude of her own chambers, became aware of the impudence she had committed, though she brooded in secret over her uneasiness, and felt too proud to avow it to even Marianne, whilst the faithful confidant, quite suspicious of the error of her mistress, exulted in her expected triumph with as much transport as though it had been her own. "Tomorrow," said she, "I shall have to do homage to my queen, and I shall have to rapture the seeing crowds kneeling humbly at her feet. Oh, would the happy day were to come! How tedious will seem this long, long night! How wearisome will be the hours! Does not your heart also throb, princess? Tomorrow I shall see my queen. Tomorrow! Oh, would it were today!" The important day at last arrived, when the delegates assembled in Blackheath Square, awaited with impatience the arrival of the princesses. Each was to deliver a speech, after which a nobleman was to be permitted to address the mob on her behalf, and then the majority of their votes was to decide. The rival princesses appeared, and were hailed with enthusiasm. They were dressed in the utmost simplicity, in the purest white, whilst from their heads hung long veils of gossamer web, the ample folds of which were effectually shielded their persons from observation. They were followed by their respective suites, Lord Gustavus and the opposition lords being most conspicuous that of Rosabella, and Lord Edmund and that of Elvira. The Duke and Sir Ambrose, attended by the Reverend Fathers Morris and Murphy, were among the numbers of spectators, the two former feeling much too agitated to allow their appearing as actors in the scene, and the others being, for different reasons, equally disqualified from taking a part in it. And now all was silent. The tumultuous wave-like heaving of the multitude ceased, and everyone listened in breathless expectation, for the princesses were about to speak. It was an awful moment. The poor old Duke's heart almost beat audibly. He sate, his eyes fixed upon the ground, not daring to look up, and holding the hand of his friend, Sir Ambrose, firmly in his own. It was Rosabella who was to speak first. She advanced with a firm, decided step, and when attendants drew back the veil that covered her, the assembled multitude uttered a shout of admiration at her beauty. Her dark eyes flashed fire as she proudly surveyed the crowd, and anticipated triumph gave an animated glow to her fine features. She looked, indeed, already a queen, and seemed born only to command and be obeyed. The multitude were awed by her presence, and listened with uplifted eyes, in the most profound silence, whilst she thus addressed them. "My lords and gentlemen, I feel the presumption I am guilty of in thus venturing to address the august assembly, but I must the magnitude of the occasion that calls me forward may afford an excuse for my extremity. I come, gentlemen, to offer myself to you as your sovereign, and the exalted nature of the trust I wish you to repose in me inspires me with courage to deserve it. Yes, gentlemen, I say to deserve it, for I should consider myself unworthy to be appointed your queen, if I were to shrink from performing any of the duties attendant upon the station, and from the most arduous of these I consider that of thus addressing you. I am aware that upon occasions like the present, it is usual for the aspiring candidate to promise miracles of reformation that are to be effected upon by obtaining the power. I promise nothing of the kind, for I will tie myself to no promises. Elect me for your queen, and I will fulfill the duties of my rank according to the best of my own judgment. I will not submit to dictation, neither will I be censured by my subjects. I will be a free, independent sovereign, while I remain a subject. I scorn to attempt to practice any deception upon you. I wish you to see me as I really am, and then, if you think me worthy of the high office I aspire to, then, at least, I may assure you, you shall never have reason to blush from your choice, nor shall the proud character of England it has so long maintained ever suffer a stain upon its glory at my hands. Now, my countrymen, haughty as I may be deemed, I assure you, with sincerity, that I have ever held the name of Englishwoman in my reverest boast, and that I should not relinquish my title to it, were kingdoms offered in exchange. I can say no more. If you approve me as your sovereign, your voices will obtain the fulfillment of your wishes. If you do not, words would not tempt me to accept the throne." Rosabella now sate down amidst thunders of applause, whilst acclamations of "Long live Rosabella!" rent the air. The symptoms of approbation were, however, only produced by her beauty and her commanding manner, for when men came to analyze her speech, they found it much to disapprove. The haughty manner in which she had disavowed control, indeed, was neither calculated to win new friends, nor secure those she already had, as the councillors who had so warmly supported her cause had certainly not imagined that by doing so they would shut the door of preferment against themselves, And what hope of promotion or power could remain during the reign of a queen who had thus openly announced her intention of acting entirely for herself? The prejudices of the people who, too wounded, had been accustomed to the promises of reformation and the relief of taxation upon the accession of a new sovereign, that they were disappointed at nothing, disappointed at not receiving them, although they knew from experience that they meant nothing. Just as persons fond of flattery cannot live without it, though they are well acquainted with its fallacy. Besides, even experience cannot make some people wise, and though the hopes of the English had been so often disappointed, it was pleasant still to have something held out to them to hope for. These thoughts arose in the breasts of the multitude, and a rising murmur was beginning to swell upon the ear, when the assembly was hushed to silence by perceiving Lord Noodle had risen, and was about to address them. "My lords and gentlemen," said he, "it is with feelings of considerable embarrassment that I rise to address you. Everything that can be said has been said, and everything that has been said ought to have been said, and everything that ought to have been said has been said. What then can there possibly be left for me to say? Let it not be supposed, however, by my saying this, that I have nothing to say for myself. On the contrary, I think everybody must be allowed to have a great deal upon the said subject." Here the noble lord tittered at his own wit, as well as it had done so, as if he had not, perhaps nobody would have found it out. "Say what I will, however, one thing must be clear, and that is—" If I was to speak for an hour, I could not say any more. "That is, that you must have a queen, and that you cannot choose a better one than the noble lady who has just sat down. And so, gentlemen, having finished, I think I cannot do better than follow her example." Shouts and roars of laughter followed his speech, to the infinite delight of the enlightened orator, and he bowed and bowed on all sides, till his head and bobbing little periwigs seemed to have acquired a gift of perpetual motion. No sooner was the tumult a little subsided than Elvira came forward to address the people. When her veil was removed, her agitation was extreme. Elvira was delicately fair, and the eloquent blood spoke in her cheeks in 1,000 varying tints. For a few seconds she stood. Her eyes were fixed upon the ground, apparently endeavoring to collect herself. Then, raising her eyes, she seemed on the point of speaking, but her courage failed her as she surveyed the immense multitude, every eye fixed upon her, and every ear listening for her words. The sounds died upon her lips, and after an ineffectual attempt to speak, she buried her face in her veil and sobbed aloud. Who can describe the agitation of her aged father at this moment? When she appeared, he had risen, and leaning forward listened with fearful eagerness, as though his ear would drink in every syllable, and as though his own death warrant hung upon her words. He became pale when he saw her agitation, and his countenance varied with every variation of hers, till, when he saw her total inability to speak, his lips became with livid whiteness, he uttered a piercing shriek, and fell senseless to the ground. A bustle immediately took place, and the Duke was carried off, and Elvira remained pale, trembling, and almost fainting, leaning against one of the pillars that supported the canopy over the platform upon which she stood. An awful pause ensued, which was at last broken by Lord Edmund rushing forward, and eagerly addressing the crowd in the following words. "My friends and countrymen, if one spark of kindness and compassion dwell in your breasts, if your hearts are open to noble feelings, if you can pity defenseless age and hopeless womanhood, listen to me now. Here, whilst I plead the cause of the timid female who before you, who, agitated by the solemn occasion for which you are all convened, and awed by the august majesty of this assembly, finds it impossible to give vent to her feelings in words, for difficult indeed it is to express by words the strong emotions of the heart. Oh, would to heaven, my friends, that I could lay her heart open before you, that you would be able to read the love for her country, and the devotion to your dearest interests, and the generous wish to sacrifice her domestic happiness to secure yours, that prompt her to this day to appear before you. Do you fear tyranny? Is this trembling woman likely to impose it? Do you wish remission from oppression? Is not she who cares evidently poses in such extreme sensibility likely to remove those cares? Can her breast, which now sobs with emotion, ever be deaf to your cries of misery? No, no, that gentle spirit which shrinks from exposure in this garish light of day will devote itself to soothing your woes, and to lightening your burdens. Do you wish for victory? Has not my arm been hitherto successful? And am I not devoted to Elvira? My countrymen, I plead not from my interested motives. God knows I do not. Nay, there may be some among you who know I am now plead for the destruction of my dearest hopes. But my welfare of my country is more to me than my own. I give my country the treasure that might have been mine, contented if by the sacrifice of my own happiness I can secure that of thousands. My countrymen, I cannot more strongly prove my devotion to your interests, for if you choose Elvira for your queen, my widowed heart will have no bride to glory. Take, however, the treasure I resign to you, prize her for her devotion, prize her as she deserves, and heaven in its mercy grant that prudent counsellors and sagacious statesmen may so direct her steps, that victory may shine upon her banners, wisdom in her counsel, and happiness for her kingdom. Lord Edmund stopped, overpowered by his own emotions, and his hesitation found an echo in the bosom of every auditor. The effect of his speech was instantaneous cries of, "Elvira shall be our queen! Elvira forever!" rose in deafening tumult from the crowd, nor did there appear a single discontent in voice. In fact, after all that has been said upon the subject, feeling is only true eloquence. The passions of the crowd were strongly excited, and the fainting of the Duke, the agitation of Elvira, and the speech of Lord Edmund, who was the hero of the day, absolutely had driven them distracted. They shouted again and again that Elvira, and Elvira alone, should be queen, and forming a triumphant car, placed her in it, and dragged her along to Westminster Abbey, where the ceremony for the coronation was appointed to take place. This venerable pile, which had stood for centuries, and resisted like war of nature the destroying of hand of invasion, with which the barbarous taste of the Middle Ages had endeavored to destroy its grandeur, shone forth in all its original splendor, and afforded another magnificent proof of the length of time the labors of man survive the term of this fragile existence. It had been a brilliant sight when Westminster was crowded with the nobles of the land to choose the Council of State, but far more splendid was it now, when after the religious part of the ceremony was coronation had been performed in the abbey, the trembling and beautiful queen entered its sumptuous walls, surrounded by her councillors, and welcomed with transport by her kneeling subjects. All had been previously prepared for the ceremony, as the ordinance of the old queen had directed the coronation to take place immediately after the election, and the venerable hall was now crowded with nobles and ladies of Claudia's court, splendidly attired, waiting for the queen, and the choice of the deputies might give them, with the most eager impatience. Elvira was received with transports, and though perhaps under different circumstances, her rival might have been honored with equal rapture. Yet, as Elvira knew it, the thought did not damp her pleasure. In the meantime, Father Morris had remained aghast, a prey to the combined tortures of grief, age, and disappointment. The crowd had disappeared, yet still he stood gazing upon the platform, the speechless image of despair. "For heaven's sake, do not remain here!" cried a voice he knew only too well, and obeying the impulse of Marianne's arm, he suffered himself to be led to the scaffold, where all hopes had perished. There was a small house at no great distance from the spot where the partisans of Rosabella had held frequent conferences respecting their plans for securing her election, and to the place Marianne led the disappointing friar. "Curses on the fiend that has betrayed me to my ruin," said he, and he threw himself upon the sofa in the abode. "May demons haunt him here, and eternal misery be his portion forever." The fiendish laugh of Cheops rang in the father's ears as he pronounced these words, and ere he finished, the hated form of the mummy stood before him. "What, Master... What, Father Morris?" cried the Egyptian. "Is this your treatment of your friends? Fie, fie! Is there strength of mind? I am ashamed of you. It is the part of the man of courage to shrink from such a slight reverse. However, I am still your friend, and if you follow my advice... You woke up to the mummy. "Avaunt, demon!" cried Father Morris. "Tempt me no more. Ruin hangs upon thy words, and it is thy advice that destroyed me." "Say rather your own evil passions," returned the mummy. "Fiend!" exclaimed the monk. "Was it not by thy advice Rosabella rejected the address I had prepared for, and determined to deliver her own sentiments in Bowser?" "Such an expression of her genuine feelings was likely to produce tenfold the times of the studied address. The oration of Lord Edmund was from the feeling of the moment, and you saw its power was magical." Cheops, actually. It was a mummy before Ramses. In fact, he supposedly had the first pyramids built, I think. I'd have to check the history. And it was not by your desire that... No, which one is this? "And it was not by your desire that the fool Lord Noodle seconded her instead of Lord Gustavus, as I had intended." "A ridiculous fool was more likely to put the people in a good humor than a posing one." "Yes, yes, I know. It was thus you made the plan seem feasible, but how have they succeeded?" "Success is not always a test of merit. How could I foresee the fainting of the Duke and the agitation of Elvira? That timid silence was far more than her words. If she had spoken, she would have had no chance." "Would she be dead?" said Father Morris, grinding his teeth. "So would you seal your ruin. Rosabella would be suspected and her chance of reigning destroyed. Destroyed forever." "And what shall I do?" "Let Elvira reign. Nay, start not, for it is but time as She will naturally make Edmund her first counselor from gratitude for the service he has rendered her, and as he has the sense and talent, he will as naturally either reject employing the noble lords who were your friends entirely, or at best give them the subordinate situations. Their hopes had been previously raised that they will be disappointed bitterly and look back with longing eyes to Rosabella, by whom they were promised place of power. That princess must moderate her natural haughtiness. If she wished to reign, she must submit and bend to the rise. For though ambition may be the lofty of all passions, perhaps no one makes its verities occasionally condescend to the great meanness. At present, patience alone is required. Novelty is always delightful, but the pleasure it produces can never be lasting, and the expectations of men having been raised too high by the brilliancy with which a new government is certain to commence, they will soon be disposed to quarrel with everything that may chance fall short of the standard they will then propose themselves, though the same standard, if they give themselves time to consider, they would find far too exalted for mortals to ever have hopes of reaching. Their extravagant expectations not being realized, they will then plunge into the opposite extreme. They will see everything with a jaundiced eye, and, not liking to own they find themselves deceived, they will overturn the government of our ride to conceal forever the folly they have been guilty of." "But will not the government of Rosabella afterwards share the same fate?" "No, for they will have tanned my wisdom by experience, and having just suffered from the inconveniences inseparable from a revolution, they will idolize every word and action of Rosabella, to spare themselves the necessity of again going under the same orders, and yet avoid the change of inconsistency. They will thus fear even to conjure, and will gloss over anything that may not quite please them, rather than run the risk of again interrupting the tranquillity which the late disturbance has made them taste the sweets of. The sophistry of Cheops was well suited for the feelings of his hearers, and well did he know how to work upon the passions of those he conversed with. The indignation of Father Morris and Marianne subsided, and they again began the Egyptians' devoted slaves. Cheops watched them as they retired, a smile of derision curling his haughty lips. "Fools that they are," he said, as again the fearful expression flashed across his saturnine countenance. "By Typhon, they are scarcely worth deceiving, for they rush blindfold into the net." In the meantime, nothing could exceed the grandeur of the scene exhibited in Westminster Hall. The ceremony was finished, for the Queen had taken oaths of fidelity to the interests of the new subjects, and had received their humblest homage in return. The sumptuous banquet was now served, where all that could please the eye mingled in luxuriant profusion with all that could tempt the appetite. Music completed the charm, and as the harmonious notes swelled through the lofty dome, it seemed a choir of angels rejoicing from on high. Thus, whilst all could gratify the senses of combined, the fair loveliness of Elvira seemed to fit her well to the goddess of the scene, and the figure of the poor old Duke, her father, gazing with her with indescribable rapture, the tears trickling down his furrowed cheeks, and his long white hair hanging loose upon his shoulders, completed the interest of the picture. Great and glorious was the triumph of Elvira, but whilst the nation rang with an acclamation of joy, and bonfires and illuminations preceded the transport of the people, who shall paint the despair, the desolation of the unfortunate Rosabella? Forlorn and deserted by her friends, and despised and injured by him she loved, disappointed in the fairy dreams of her ambition, and disgusted with a world that had rejected her. What could she do? Where find a refuge for her woes? Rosabella sought no refuge. Wretched as she was, her proud spirit still supported her. She neither retired from society, nor gave herself up as a paroxysm of despair. Hers was not a mind to brood over useless grief. She felt her wrongs, it is true, and most keenly did she feel them, but she wasted not her time in lamentation, and burnt only to avenge them. Marianne had communicated to her the advice of Cheops, and her whole soul was now devoted to revenge. For this she determined to obey his injunctions, to bend her haughty spirit to his wishes, to conciliate her friends that had deserted her, and to submit to any meanness to keep up a party in the state. This done, she resolved to watch for the errors unavoidable by a new government, to take advantage of every weakness, and to foment every discontent. In short, to take advantage of every weakness. In short, to open a chasm under her rival's feet, and then, like a lion Prince Mar on the brink of a sandy trap, to rest concealed until the entanglement of its expected prey enabled her to rush upon it and destroy it. Elvira's disposition was naturally noble, and satisfied with the possession of the throne, she sought no farther triumph. Her generous soul was touched by the apparent resignation of her rival, and she endeavored, by every means in her power, to console her for her disappointment. The Duke had quitted upon the country, and now resided entirely with his daughter, whilst upon Rosabella, Elvira, with utmost delicacy, conferred a palace with a separate establishment. Notwithstanding, however, the delicacy with which Elvira's favours were conferred, Rosabella could not forget they were favours, and hers was not a mind to brook dependence. She hated her cousin, thus increased with the weight of her obligations, whilst that of Elvira had vanished with the occasion that gave it birth. It is, indeed, scarcely possible for a proud, haughty temper, like that of Rosabella's, to love the person to whom she owes everything. Such dispositions find infinitely more pleasure in obliging than to be obliged, pride being gratified in one case and humbled in the other. People are thus often devotedly attached to their protégés, as they seem, in some measure, creations of their own, and lavish favours upon them with a profuse hand. But they often expect such devotion in return, that love withers into slavery and changes into hatred. And at once gratitude soon becomes mortification. Elvira had an arduous part to sustain. It was difficult to find the medium between giving too much and too little, and more difficult still to discover a means of giving at all without hurting the feelings of Rosabella. The sense she had of this rendered the manner of Elvira towards her cousin occasionally cold and restrained, and Rosabella felt acutely the slightest change. She indeed saw everything with a jaundiced eye. She imagined insults where none were intended. She shrank from the slightest observation that could be supposed to allude to her present situation, and she appeared to feel as much pain whenever she was in the society of Elvira, that the intercourse between the cousins gradually dwindled to a mere formal interchange of visits and the customary ceremonies of court etiquette. The cousins, thus completely estranged from each other, Rosabella's palace became a resort of the discontented. The King of Ireland had died soon after the departure of the Duke of Cornwall for the country, and those malcontents, formerly in his pay, being repulsed by his son, now crowded around Rosabella. Men of talents, but of dissolute habits, daring spirits that preyed upon themselves for want of employment, and desperate characters to whom every change was agreeable, as they had nothing to lose and everything to hope for by a revolution, vied with each other in devoting themselves to her service. It was often grating to Rosabella's feelings to associate with wretches such as these, but to what cannot proud spirits sometimes submit, to gain the determined purpose of their souls? Everything is swallowed up in one vast overwhelming passion, and the minor difficulties are neither seen, thought of, nor felt. Thus Rosabella scripted not to waste her time in the society of such beings as Lord Noodle and his friend Lord Doodle. She even stooped to flattering, and occasionally to ask, and to appear to follow their advice. She endured patiently the dictatorial prosing of Lord Gustavus, and listened with an appearance of interest to the wearisome pettiness of Lord Maysworth. And she thought of, or was rather in the particular line of conduct were likely to conduct the placing of her on the throne, and if it were, be what it might, the haughty Rosabella instantly consented to practice it. Taught by the late events not to rely too confidently upon her own strength, she rushed into the opposite extreme, and descended even into servility. In the meantime, the attention of Elvira was completely devoted to the establishment of her government. She had many qualities worthy of her rank, and some of the most conspicuous were her nobleness in forgetting injuries, and the inflexible sense of justice. Though she made no promises herself to the people on the day of her election, she justly considered those made by Edmund on her part of equal bidding, and endeavored by every means in her power to redeem the pledges he had given. Cheops had judged rightly in supposing she would make Edmund her prime minister. Her gratitude to him, indeed, was unbounded, and though her noble and generous disposition prevented her from depriving the lords who had voted against her their dignities, yet that the strong mind and commanding genius of Edmund would make them dwindle in nonnities. He had also been equally content in predicting. The noble lords, quite unconscious of their own inefficiency, were indignant at finding themselves subalterns when they had hoped to be commanders, and rallied around the standard of Rosabella, who, on her part, received them so graciously that her former haughtiness was forgiven. Elvira was not aware of their defection, or if she were, she thought them too insignificant to merit notice, her being entirely occupied by the affairs in which she considered more of infinitely more importance. Though the laws of the old queen had been excellent, many abuses crept into the manner of putting them into execution, and these Elvira, now with the aid of Edmund, set herself diligently to work to discover and correct. She could not, indeed, have chosen an assistant more competent to the task. The penetrating mind and commanding genius of Edmund were unequalled. With a slight glance, he saw where the errors had been committed, and how they ought to be amended. Whilst under his auspices, vice was punished and virtue rewarded. Goodness, though in rags, was raised to affluence, and villainy compelled to disgorge its ill-gotten wealth. Justice was impartially dispensed to all, On the first Monday of every month, the Queen proceeded in solemn state to the grand square of Blackheath to receive there, in person, the petitions of her subjects. The crowd assembled upon these occasions was immense. However, while a constitution may be organized, it is impossible to give satisfaction to everyone, and under the best regulated governments there will always be some fancy themselves aggrieved. Besides, as free access was allowed on these occasions to everyone, numbers went merely to see the Queen, and nothing could better be contrived than letting Her Majesty know the real feelings of her subjects. And this arrangement, and as the people being placed in lines, along each of which the Queen walked, she became alternately in personal contact with every separate individual. Like everything else, however, that sounds perfect in theory. Difficulties arose when this plan came to be put into practice. It was originally intended that the Queen should receive, with her own hands, and read herself, all the petitions that might be presented. But when it found their numbers frequently amounted to some thousands, this scheme was abandoned as impracticable, and Lords Noodle and Doodle were appointed to the important office of walking behind the Queen, carrying large bags in which the petitions were deposited, and from which they could probably never see again, if they had not been dragged to light by the persevering and indefatigable exertions of Lord Edmund. The people, however, were not aware of this, and there was something in the show that delighted them. It was indeed a fine sight to behold so many hundreds of beings anxiously watching the movements of their beautiful Queen as she glided among their ranks, smiling graciously upon all, and looked like an angel sent upon earth to dispense blessings to mankind. Ladies of honor walked behind her, the pages bearing their train, and the two aged councillors of state, bending beneath the weight of their ponderous bags, bringing up the rear. Thus gloriously commenced Elvira's reign. The people, delighted with the attention paid to their wishes, and struck by some instances of the Queen's love of justice and hatred of oppression, lauded her to the skies. The nobility, hoping riches and power from her liberality, almost worshipped her, and the ambassadors of foreign powers, dreading the valor of Lord Edmund and his soldiers, offered the humblest homage at her feet. In short, all seemed to smile upon her, and the kingdom to bid fair shortly to rival even the imagined happiness of Utopia itself. Should I continue? Another chapter we can do. I'm not sure how long it is, but it answers some questions. Like, what happened to the people that actually brought him back to life? Because they kind of got abandoned in Egypt. Yeah, we need to know what happened to them. Chapter 19. In the meantime, what had become of Edric and Dr. Entwerfen? Gloomy indeed were those reflections of our travellers when they found themselves immured in a dungeon, so far from all they loved and revered, without friends, and accused of a horrible crime from the guilt of which they felt it would be in vain for them to attempt to free themselves. Days and weeks rolled on, yet no change took place in their destiny. Every night the grating of a rusty key in the lock announced the arrival of their jailer, bringing their daily pittance of bread and water, but he never spoke, nor could the most earnest entreaties of the doctor and Edric bring one word to his lips. Despair at length began to invade the bosoms of the travellers, till one day, as they were examining, for the 1000th time, the hieroglyphics on the stone walls, Edric perceived one of them was loose. With infinite difficulty they removed the stone, and found a long vaulted passage, dimly lighted by an opening at the farther extremity. The transport of the prisoners on making this discovery was unbounded, and can only be imagined by those who have felt the loss of liberty and rejoiced at its recovery. When the first raptures had a little abated, they began to consult upon the best means of availing themselves of their good fortune and preventing pursuit. The doctor had luckily several chemical preparations in his walking stick. With one of these he dissolved the iron of their chains, and as to set Edric and himself free of their weight, and then smearing them over with the remainder of the composition, he laid them in a heap, exclaiming with a laugh, "The jailers are dreadfully frightened when they'll find these fetters, and though they look perfect to the eye, they will crumble to pieces at the slightest touch." Edric was too anxious to effect his escape, and to listen to his tutor's exultation, and his arrangements being made, the travellers, with trembling steps and throbbing hearts, explored the vaulted passage, and found, to their infinite delight, that it led them to the borders of the Nile. A small boat was anchored to the shore, and its crew, an old man and a son, who gained their living by conveying goods up and down the Nile, were peacefully taking their supper on the bank. Edric and the doctor had taken the preparation to replace the stone that had concealed the vaulted passage, and having smeared the opposite wall with phosphorus, they had no doubt that when the jailer entered the prison, which they had entered in the darkness, he would be much too alarmed to take any effectual means of pursuing them until it would be too late. Having luckily also plenty of money, that certain road to the human heart, they easily persuaded the old man to take them on board, and in a short time they embarked in this fragile vessel and set sail. Slowly and silently they floated along the majestic river, which rolled in solemn waves like an inland sea, and swept proudly into the ocean, seeming to scorn the degenerate land it left behind, and without one pang did our travellers quit forever the fertile plains and gorgeous cities of Egypt. Only one thought swelled in their bosoms, and that was joy at their escape. Offering up silent prayers of thanksgiving, and the travellers continued their journey down the river, and when morning dawned, and the enormous forms of the pyramids were seen grimly frowning through the mist, they shuddered involuntarily, and devoutly crossing themselves, muttered a new prayer for protection and deliverance. After a long and tedious voyage, our travellers at length reached the sea in safety. The mouths of the delta were at that time a seat of extravagance, and the most universal commerce, and our travellers trembled lest they should have encountered an emissary of their enemies, who might be conveyed to them to prison, which they found they had miraculously escaped. They found, however, the belief of their supernatural disappearance too strongly impressed upon the minds of the multitude for even a suspicion of the existence to remain, and they stood upon the sumptuous quay, surrounded by the Greeks, Romans, Russians, Egyptians, Arabs, and Turks, without exciting a single remark, or obtaining the slightest attention. They wished to proceed to Constantinople, then the capital of the powerful Empire of Greece, and entered into conversation with the master of Felucia for that purpose. "I'll attend to you gentlemen directly," said the sailor, leaving some persons with whom he had been previously talking, "but I have been listening to such a horrid tale." "What was it?" asked Edric, suspecting the subject, but aware that it seemed incredulous upon such an occasion might betray they were already too well informed. "Two sorcerers," replied the man, "have been taken into custody for blowing up the pyramids and bewitching the mummies." "And how were they punished?" asked Edric. "Oh, you haven't heard the half of it yet," said the man. "When they were put into prison for their pranks, the old one came to their help and carried them off in a flame of fire, leaving a long trail of light after them in the sky, like the trail of a blazing comet. Dick Jones, who was telling me, swears he saw them all going up after, the old one hanging by the devil's horn and the young one keeping fast on its tail." "Shocking," said Edric, scarcely able, however, to repress a smile at the proof of the vividness of Dick Jones's imagination. "I haven't told you half," resumed the man. "All Sumatra rings with it. Several have gone mad, and others died with fear, and the man who was with Dick Jones, who was one of the soldiers that God set over them, assured me as a positive fact that the chains they had been on had left behind them crumbled with his fingers between the rotten wood." "It's very awful," said Edric. "Aye, is it not?" rejoined the man. "Thank God I was not there to see. I am sure the very look of one of those conjurers would have driven me mad. I never could abide such things." Edric, now with some difficulty, persuaded the man to return to the subject of their transit. "I'm very sorry, sir," said he, "but I don't think there'll be a vessel going to Constantinople for a week at least, for they've got the plague there, and our magistrates won't let a ship that's been there return to the harbor again without performing quarantine. and that is such a hindrance to the trade of our folks as I don't like. But perhaps if you are in no hurry, you can wait."
"Oh, yes, we can wait quite well,"
said the doctor, trembling with anxiety to be off. The sailor, however, had no occasion to say more, for the bare mention of the plague was quite sufficient to deter our travellers from visiting Constantinople, and finding that he was bound for Malta, and that no other vessel quit the harbour that day, they hastily embarked. Notwithstanding his vessel was old and inconvenient, and not forwarded by steam, but though a certain superior certainty of steam packets was now so generally felt and acknowledged by all, perhaps this was the only common sailing boat in the harbour. The joy of our travellers at their deliverance was, however, too great to permit them to dwell upon trifles, and as the cabin was scarcely habitable, they resolved to remain on deck the whole of their voyage, being determined to submit to anything sooner than delay their departure. Accordingly, they stretched themselves upon their cloaks, and, reclining against some ropes, watched attentively the lovely scene around them. The evening was beautiful, and the shores of Egypt swiftly receded from their view, and they felt the mind soothed by the contemplation of the grand scene that presented itself. There is, indeed, something in the awful majesty of the world of waters which, like the gigantic monuments of Egypt, powerfully affects the mind by its very simplicity, and by raising the soul far above the common trifling occurrences of life, soothes it to tranquillity. The voyage was long, for contrary winds impeded their progress, and one evening, after Dr. Entwerfen had remained for some time gazing steadfastly at the water, with a deep look of abstraction, he exclaimed to himself,
"There'll be a storm."
"Impossible," returned Edric. "The sun is in wanton splendor, spreading its rays purple and gold through the waters like a jeweled diadem. The wind is now even now dying into a gentle breeze, which scarcely curls the surface of the ocean, and a bark dances gaily over it."
"That is a bad sign,"
said the doctor.
"Have you not often heard that a storm is generally preceded by a calm? There will be no affair to find it now."
The moon shone brightly, and the ship plowed her way through the almost motionless waves. Its beams sparkled through the spray, which fell in silvery showers upon the prow. And now all was still except the heaving of the vessel and the monotonous splashing of the waters as she slowly worked her way through them. The wind gradually sunk, and the sails only feebly flapped in the breeze that could no longer inflate them, till at last even that had failed, and the vessel, completely becalmed, lay like a log upon the water, which spread like a vast and tranquil mirror around her. Bitterly now did our travellers regret the precipitate haste that had made them embark in such a frail, unmanageable boat, and they regarded with longing eyes the compact steam packets that glided past them, their black smoke curling in the air as though they wafted gently along. It was too late, however, to repent, and the doctor consoled himself by taking advantage of the effect produced by the black, thick smoke, but they saw it rising in the distance to illuminate the lectern which he had formerly given his pupil on the theory of combustion and decomposition of amphibites, till he fairly lulled himself to a deep sleep. Morning came, but brought not with it the wished-for breeze. Edric rose and walked upon the deck, encountered by the doctor.
"How still it seems," he said. "Nature seems to sleep, but 'tis an awful stillness as such that falls upon a dying patient, prophetic of the end. Nature seems exhausted, and I can only fancy in seeking a short repose to rally her energies for another place below."
And that was all done in the wrong voice. "How still it seems," said he. "Nature seems to sleep, but 'tis an awful stillness as such falls upon a dying patient, prophetic of the end. Nature seems exhausted, and I could fancy is seeking a short repose to rally her energies for some decisive blow."
"You are fanciful, Edric," said the doctor. "You alarm yourself unnecessarily. The violent shock to your nerves has been sustained unfits you for exertion, and renders you disposed to see everything in a gloomy light."
"I beg your pardon, sir," said the ragged English sailor, who happened to be on board. "In my opinion, the gentleman is right, for everything portends a storm. The cirrus stratus streak in the sky, as they join the fleecy cumuli below and the stratus cumuli, nothing more clearly indicative of wind and rain, and probably thunder. And see, too, how the dark frowning nimbus cloud spreads in black shade along the edge of the horizon,
Now the birds fly cowering, almost touching the waters with their wings as if they long. Now it begins. Ha! Whilst the sailor had been speaking, the clouds had thickened gradually, and the sky had grown dark as night. A hollow murmuring was heard, from which it seemed to gather fury as it came, till it burst over the devoted vessel with terrific violence and rent the sails to atoms, whistling through the fearful gusts as though mocking the mischief it had done. The sea now heaved mountains high, the forked lightning playing like the withering serpents along the deep black sky, now streaming like floating ribbons in the sky, and darting downwards like fire arrows. Thunder rolled heavily in the distance, approaching, however, nearer and nearer, and every peal reverberating through the sky, as though echoed back by unseen rocks, till at last a tremendous crash announced a fail of electric fluid. Our travelers were preparing to retire below, when they had just reached the cabin stairs. The heavens seemed to open, and like a ball of blue light fire, amidst the vivid brightness, that shot downwards from the chasm and struck the mast of the laboring ship. Immediately after, a loud crackling noise rattled over their heads, and then all again still, save the howling winds and the groans of some prostrate seaman, wounded by the scattering fragments of the splintering mast. Wounded by the scattering fragments of the splintered mast. The rain now descended in torrents, and the feeble vessel at once raised for a moment. I'm getting tired. The rain now descended in torrents, and the feeble vessel at one moment raised to a frightful height, then dashed down, and apparently engulfed by the heavy seas that washed over her, seemed every instant doomed for destruction, to escape only by a miracle. The shouts of the seamen and creaking of the strained members of the ship mingled horribly with the howling of the wind and the roar of the billows. Every instant it was exposed that she should go to pieces, for she had sprung a leak, and the water rose so fast as to baffle every attempt to make a check on its progress. The seamen were now in despair, and they broke in their trunks and dressed themselves in their best clothes. They filled their pockets with all the valuables they could find, whilst some went to prayers, others broke into the captain's spirit chest, and many rolled overboard in a state of intoxication, whilst the ship now became a perfect wreck, drifted among the wind, and was sinking rapidly. The storm, however, seeming to abate, the master ordered out the boat, and all the seamen that remained their senses eagerly sprang on board. Our travelers attempted to follow, but the seamen pushed them back, and exclaiming the boat was full, rowing off and leaving them to their fate. An English sailor had been in the act of stepping on board the boat the very moment she pushed off, and a sudden shock precipitated him into the sea. A piercing scream burst from his lips as his body, with a dying effort, sprang from the waves which seemed to rise after him and struck him back into the gulf. Our friends heard the cry and rushed to the side of the vessel, but alas, they were powerless to save him. The ship drifted rapidly by, and they saw his hands gleam for a moment through the waves as he raised them in agony, and the roaring billows rolled on, deep, black, and gloomy as ever. The horror of Edric and the doctor was excessive, but the impending terrors of their own fate prevented the possibility of their minds dwelling upon his. The storm, however, visibly abated, and the dismantled hulk they were on, lightened by the desertion of sailors, still swam. Light, fleecy clouds now succeeded rapidly upon the skies, and the moon, struggling to break forth from behind them, shed a faint and watery gleam upon the scene. Our travelers now, by the feeble light afforded them by moonbeams, perceived the boat laboring heavily through the grey dark sea, and struggling to reach the long black line of rocks distinctly remarked in the distance, against which they were still boiling waters broke with tremendous roar, curling in whitened foam as they leaved the craggy sides, whilst the wreck our travelers were upon seemed rapidly drifting upon the same point. Death now appeared inevitable, as it was impossible their shattered bark should receive a shock if it should be tossed against those jagged crags, and every moment she seemed rising upon a wave that must dash her upon them, floating back to escape only by a miracle. The doctor and Edric became giddy with these repeated shocks, and in despair fancied themselves resigned, or rather stunned by the misfortunes which had followed each other with such overwhelming rapidity that they devoured heads. They awaited their fate with an apathy which they mistook for resignation. The seamen in the boat continued laboring on,
straining every nerve to reach the shore, though ineffectually, for a foaming surge beat them back with repeated and resistant violence. With anxious eyes and beating hearts, our friends marked the progress of their boat, until, giddy with watching and feeling the spirits exhausted as they surveyed the fruitless struggle of the toiling boatmen, they hid their faces with their eyes and shut it from their sight. In this instant, a wild and piercing cry rang in their ears. It was from our boat. She was swamped, and the human beings she contained were all swallowed up in the boiling waves, and the shrieked agony of cry of their funeral knell. The horrid silence followed this appalling scream, unbroken by the lashing of the billows against the rocks, and the low, half-suppressed moaning of the winds, till the senses of the travelers became bewildered, and they shrieked in agony. Their peril, indeed, grew every moment more intense, for every wave carried them nearer and nearer to those frowning crags, whilst the dark skies, rearing themselves in awful majesty, seemed mustering their strength to repel the insolent intruders that sought to invade their territory. The doctor and Edric, in the meantime, suffering 1,000 deaths of the protracted horrors they had compelled to endure, and which they could neither mitigate nor evade, shrank back with the shivering of the affrighted nature trembling in dissolution, every time the wave which their vessel floated seemed to dash against the shore. At length, however, the fate they had long dreaded arrived. The shattered hulk was raised with a tremendous blow, and thrown to the fearful violence upon the rocks, with a force that shivered it to atoms, and engulfed the doctor and Edric in the boiling surge. The next wave, however, returning, swept them along its bosom, and threw them, perfectly insensible, though locked into each other's arms, upon the shore. Yay! Well, now we know what's happened to them in the meantime. Oh. That's 3 more chapters. That gets us to starting in 20? Yeah. That means there's 12 chapters left. Well, 13. Seems appropriate. But now, should probably find someone to raid. Let's see. Who is still on? I don't see any of the readers I usually go to. Wait. Is Harp on? Okay. Harp Griffin is still on. So we're going to raid them. We get to go from the mummy to Dracula. Should I do? I guess subscribers. Or if you have points, you can get the reading message out. But yeah. I hope to see all of you tomorrow when we do some more fairy tales. But for now, oh, that's funny. They're already talking about it. Okay. See you all later. Have a good night.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist, lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play. The echoes of forgotten tales, dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breathes a shiver, its ancient heartbeats thrum. Underneath the silver glow, the wild whispers come. Time to close the book, let the pages fall. You've roamed the winding paths, now heed the twilight.